Thank you for coming tonight. You know, when Missy asked me if I would speak just about a year ago, I wasn't quite sure what to say. So I said I would pray about it. And I didn't hear anything from her for about 2 months. And so I kind of thought, yes, I'm off the hook. And then I got a phone call from her, and she left a message. And she said, you know, Michelle, do you remember that Truth on Tap thing that I asked you to speak at? Well, I really need to know an answer. And so I didn't call her back. And I prayed about it a little bit more. And I said, dear God, I don't know if this is what you would want me to do. So I really need a neon flashing sign that would say, yes, this is what you're supposed to do. And I need it by tomorrow morning because I've got to call her back. So morning rolled around, and I picked up the phone and I called her, and I still hadn't gotten my neon flashing sign. And she said, well, you know what, why don't you come to the meeting? We'll have a discernment process. You can do all these different things. And I thought, okay, I can go to a meeting, and if this is too scary, I can still say no. That morning, I pulled up the mass readings for the day, and this is what it said. This is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Since then, we have the same spirit of faith, according to what is written, I believed, therefore I spoke. We too believe, and therefore speak. And then it went on to say, everything indeed is for you, so that the grace bestowed in abundance on more and more people will cause the thanksgiving to overflow for the glory of God. I believed, therefore I spoke. So I knew I was going to have to do it. So then I said, okay, what in the world am I going to speak about? So I began to pray like crazy, because I knew I had about a year, so I figured I had enough time to think of something. And as I prayed, I began to get this image in my head. And the more I prayed, the more this image would come to me. And I knew this image, I recognized it. It was a photograph that I took when Jim and I were fortunate enough to go to Africa. This was the second time I had been to Africa, but it was Jim's first time. And when we were in Africa, we had the opportunity to go to a place called Sudwana Bay. It's a very remote beach, and so as you walk along the sand, the jungle kind of creeps up and just perches on the edge of the sand. And the sand kind of trickles down into the sea. And the sea is the most amazing blue that you can ever imagine. And as I was walking along this beach, I came across a set of footprints. Just a single set of footprints extending off into the distance. And it struck me. So I knelt down and I snapped a picture. When I got home from the trip, I was very excited to see this picture because I remembered it. It was significant to me. So when I came across this picture, I blew it up on the computer, and I was amazed. Because when I took that picture, all I saw were the footprints. But when I looked at the picture later, I realized that there was a lot more in that picture that I didn't see at the moment. In fact, in that picture, in the background, was my husband Jim. And he had crouched down, and he was gazing out into the sea. And those footprints were in fact his. And they were leading right towards him. And this was our 10th anniversary, so it was very fitting. This picture was very fitting for us. But I realized how much this picture was an analogy of my life. How oftentimes, at the moment, all I could see was the footprints. I was so focused on what was going on at that moment in my life that I couldn't see the big picture. It was only later, when I reflected on it, that I could actually see what was going on and the different ways God was working in my life. So I want to take you to a time in my life that I first experienced God. I was 18 years old, and I had decided to go to World Youth Day in Denver. I didn't go because I was particularly holy. I went because it just sounded like a lot of fun. On the first day that we were to meet the Pope, we had to do a journey. So when you get off the bus, you would pack up everything that you needed, your sleeping bag, your pillows, your clothes, and you would have to walk about 3 miles to get to the place where the Pope was going to come. And there were record high temperatures that week while we were in Denver. And so as we were walking, we had to walk through all these suburban areas to get to this big field. And it was so hot out that all the people had come out of their houses, and they actually had turned their hoses on, and they were spraying these great plumes of water, and you would walk through the water, and of course you got wet. And then when we got to the field, it was dry and dusty. All the grass had turned brown. So we began to walk, and we began to get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier. And that's how we were going to be for the next 2 days. So we end up in this field, and you find your little spot, and you roll out your sleeping bag, and that's where you're going to be. They had a stage off to the far end of the field, and they had ropes that cordoned off kind of a central aisle, so you could walk up towards the stage, and then you could peel off on either side. So when the Pope came, all of us had an opportunity to walk up close to the stage, and you could see the Pope up close. So of course I got in line like everybody else. And as I was walking, I began to notice this sensation deep inside of my heart. And the closer I got to the Pope, the stronger it got. And it was a deep, overwhelming sense of love. I had never felt anything like that, ever. It was a supernatural love. It was so big and so wide. I just couldn't even comprehend it. And I began to cry, which I was horrified at 18, surrounded by my peers, and I'm just sobbing as I'm walking up towards the Pope. And when I was 18, I was convinced this love was coming from Pope John Paul. But as I thought about it, I believe it was coming from Pope John Paul, but he was reflecting this amazing love of God to everyone that was there. But it felt like it was just for me. It was so personal. And I was completely taken back because I had done nothing to deserve this love. Yet here it was. So when I got home from that trip, I said, God, what do you want me to do with this life that you gave me? Do you want me to become a nun? And I got nothing. I was like, okay. Do you want me to be married? And I immediately got a sense of peace. I was like, okay, that's good. Do you want me to be a physical therapist? I was already signed up to go to UND. And immediately I got this sense of peace again. And I was like, okay, now this is me asking you if you want me to be a nun. And I got nothing. So again, I asked, am I supposed to be a mother? Do you want me to be married? And again, I got this sense of peace. So I was like, all right, I know what I'm going to do with my life. And so, being the type of person I am, I made a beeline for UND. I completed my master's degree in 5 years. And so I graduated from physical therapy school when I was 23. Now, the good thing is I was very focused. The bad thing was, during that time, I had never bothered again to ask God, What do you want me to do? So I graduated PT school, checked the box. At the time, I had a very serious boyfriend. We had gone to look at rings together. He checked off all the boxes on my list. Check. And I thought, boy, I have arrived. This is it. I have checked off all the boxes on my list. But God was about to teach me a humbling lesson. One that changed my life. Not too long after that, the serious boyfriend that I had broke up with me. And at 23, I was devastated, but not for the reason you might think. There's a saying that goes, find the most important thing in your life and build your life around that. Well, what do you do if the most important thing, the thing that you've built your life around, is suddenly gone? I had focused so hard and so long on this relationship because I so badly wanted to be a mother that I didn't have anything else. This is what my life was about. I had been willing to sacrifice, in essence, who I was and change who I was to keep this relationship. So when it wasn't there, I didn't know who I was. I was lost. And I remember asking God, you just took away my chance to become a mother. And I was very upset by this. Of course, it was my plan and not God's plan. And at this point in my life, I didn't trust that God perhaps could have something better for me. So as all of this is going on in my life, I got my first headache, which seems like no big deal, and it was no big deal. I got up and I took 2 Advil and I went to work. The problem was the headache never went away. It was located right here in the lower back part of my head. And as the days went by, this headache got worse and worse and worse. But I didn't tell anyone because I was a strong, independent woman and I was going to keep it all together. But as the days went by, this headache began to grow, and it would come down into my jaw, and come up over my head, and would come down into my shoulder. And it got to the point where I was beginning to have trouble sleeping. So I decided I better go to the doctor. And of course they did all the right tests, all the right things, and everything came back negative. But yet I still had this pain. This pain that was keeping me up at night. Was making it difficult for me to see. And I remember the doctor looking at me and saying, there's nothing wrong with you. It's all in your head. And I remember thinking, yeah, no kidding, it's all in my head. I can feel it right there. But I still didn't say anything. And as the days went by, it became more and more difficult for me to work. I have a profession where I get the great honor to help people who are in pain. But it was becoming very, very difficult for me to help people when I was in such pain myself. It got to the point where I would go to work, halfway through I would lay down at lunch and I would wrap my head in ice, and then I would get up and I would finish the rest of the day. And it went on like this for a long time, months in fact. And finally one day, my manager stopped me and said, can I please see you in my office? And so at the end of that day, I went to her office and I sat down and she looked at me and she grabbed my hand and she said, Michelle, are you doing drugs? And I started to laugh. And then I started to cry because I hadn't told anyone what was going on. And here she was thoughtful enough and courageous enough to see that something was not right And she asked with such compassion and without any judgment. And so the whole story came spilling out. And she said, well, Michelle, let us help you. We are in the business of helping people with pain. Let us help you. So I became a patient myself. And as I began to get treated, one of the things that I noticed was the more people pushed and massaged and told me what to do, the worse I got. And I was devastated by this because this is my profession. All these people were trying to help me, and I had no relief at all. And I remember at this point falling to my knees one night and saying, God, what is it that you want? You have taken away marriage. You have taken away motherhood. You have taken away my health. And now you've taken away my confidence in my profession. What else do you want? And of course the answer is, he wanted my heart. But I wasn't ready to see that at that point. I was very fortunate that around the same time, another therapist, who had been a therapist a long time, over 20 years, came to me one day and she goes, Michelle, I would like to try something with you. Something very different. And at this point, I was willing to do anything, right? And I can remember the night before she was going to treat me, I was at one of the lowest points in my life. And it was at this point that I began to hear the whisper of the devil. And I can remember very clearly, he said to me, you know, there are some things that will make you feel better. There's a whole lot of alcohol over there in your cabinet. You could do that instead of going to therapy because you know everything that everyone's done has not helped you. You're in the medical profession. I bet if you tried hard enough, there would be some awful good drugs that you could take that would make you feel better. Even better yet, if you were no longer in existence, you could just close your eyes. You would feel no pain, and you could just drift away into nothingness. And to this day, I don't know why I didn't go down any of those roads, except I must have had someone praying for me somewhere. And I remembered that love of God. I remembered that. And so I did not do any of those things, even though that lure was very strong, because I just was hurting so badly. So I went to that appointment the next day, and I laid down on the table, and she put her hands on me. And I knew immediately that this was different. She put her hands on me with such humility and such love. It was as if she asked my body, what do you need? I am not going to decide for you. What do you need to feel better? And that's what she did. And I began to get better. My pain started to go away. And I knew from that moment on that I could not go back to being who I was before. The prideful person who took my life in my own hands and was determined to see my will throughout everything. I knew I could not go back to being that person, because whatever she had done, I wanted to do that for somebody else. But how do you go about changing who you are? I had lived my life a certain way for 24 years up to this point. And I can remember asking God, I don't know how to do this. I don't know the first thing about being humble. I don't know how to do this. So as all these thoughts were rolling around in my head, it wasn't that long afterwards when a day came and I got a cancellation on my schedule, which was very rare at the place that I worked. It was right in the middle of the day. And even rarer yet, I had no paperwork to do. So I thought, I have an hour of free time. So I decided that I would go over to the hospital, because I knew on the 5th floor of the hospital there was a piano in the family waiting room. At this time, I did not have a piano of my own. Piano is a passion of mine. And so I got very good at figuring out where pianos were that I could play. So I went over there and I sat down and I began to play. And it wasn't too long after I started when I heard a voice behind me saying, "Excuse me." So I stopped and I turned around. And behind me, there was an older woman who was sitting in a wheelchair. Her head was down, her hands were clasped, and she was holding a white handkerchief in her hands. And behind her was her daughter. And her daughter looked at me and said, "We heard you playing from across the hall. My dad is across the hall, and he's very, very near death. But he loved the piano. So could you please play something for him?" And of course, I nodded my head. And this older woman looked up, and she looked right into my eyes, and she said, his favorite song was Clair de Lune. And then they said thank you and left. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the song Clair de Lune. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece of music by Claude Debussy, but it is 6 pages long. And it is written in 4 flats. And halfway through, it changes to 5 sharps, and then goes back to 4 flats. But it was also the song that I played by memory for my senior piano recital 6 or 7 years before that. And I wasn't sure if I could play it, because I hadn't played it in a long time. But I turned around, and as I played those first 2 chords, it all began to come back to me. And I played that song for that family. And I played until I couldn't see anymore because the tears were just falling. And when I finished, I just put my hands over my eyes and I just cried. I just sobbed. Because what are the odds of me having a cancellation in my schedule on that day and choosing to go to the hospital where somehow I knew there was a piano up there, and for them to have that room across the hall, and for his favorite song to be Clair de Lune, which I knew how to play. I mean, that is no coincidence. And I thought, wow, if God can go into that much detail, starting from when I'm a senior in high school, he has got to have a plan for me. And he has got to know how to get me from here to there. And so I said, it's all yours, God. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I know that you can get me there. And I just gave everything to God. First time ever truly doing that in my life. And God let me sit in that spot for a year of figuring out who I was, of not knowing where I should go or what I should do. And I figured out really fast that I thought I was a patient person, but I'm not at all. And so that was one of the things that God, I believed, tried to help me with in that year. After that year passed, I got a phone call from a friend, and his name was Jim. He was in the Minneapolis area, which is where I was, and he was in the Navy, so he was on leave, and he was visiting his sister, and somehow he had gotten my phone number. And he said, "Hey, would you like to do something?" And I said, "Sure, I have tomorrow off. How about tomorrow?" And so we decided to go for a bike ride. Well, I knew Jim well. I hadn't seen him for quite some time, but we had dated when we were in high school. So, of course, I wanted to make a suitably good impression. So I think I changed outfits like 5 times that morning, and I went there, and the first thing I did when I got there was locked my keys in my car. And my bike was in the car. So he was very gracious about it, and we stood for the next hour on the driveway talking until someone came and unlocked my car. And so we spent the day biking. In fact, we biked 40 miles that day. I don't think either one of us wanted the day to end. And when I left that evening, I thought, wow, he's just like I remember him, but better. And I couldn't get him out of my head. But I knew that he was going to go back to North Carolina in 2 days. So I didn't think much of it. Except I just couldn't get him out of my head. And so I asked God, I said, "What's the deal here?" And I felt like God was saying, "Okay, Michelle, I have been hearing you talk about this since you were 18 years old. Look what I put in front of you, so what are you going to do about it?" So I did the only thing I knew how to do. The day that he was to leave, I called in sick to work, and I went to the airport to find him. And I knew that it was either going to be, creepy stalker kind of surprise, or it was going to be a really good surprise. And thankfully, it was a really good surprise. And that's how Jim and I's relationship started. Well, we dated for about a year, long distance. And I knew that I was going to have to make a decision. And very clearly, I talked to God about this because although I was very excited, and I knew Jim was a godly man, and there was a peace about him that I had rarely encountered from anyone else. He wasn't Catholic. And when I get stressed, I pull out my checklist. So I pulled out the checklist again, and I said, "God, I have this really great checklist right here, and the first thing on it says must be Catholic." And God said, "Don't worry about it." And then I said, and he lives in North Carolina. And I said that I would never move anywhere for a guy, ever. And you're going to make me eat my words, aren't you? So I thought about it, and I prayed about it some more, and I finally came to a decision. But I had to tell my dad. So one afternoon I said, "Dad, I've put in my notice to work. I'm going to move to North Carolina. I don't have a job yet, and I have no idea where I'm going to stay. But I think this is what God wants me to do. And by the way, I'm going to go to Africa sometime in there too." And I remember my dad just kind of slowly sank down. And there were some stairs right where we were, and he just sat down on the stairs. And he didn't react anything like I thought he would. They say the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, and I have been accused of being slightly dramatic at times, and so I get it from my dad. So I was fully expecting hand waving, lots of yelling, but that's not what happened at all. In fact, he didn't try to dissuade me from going. So somehow, in the 2 months from when I put my notice in to when I moved to North Carolina, I found a job, found a place to live, went on an amazing trip to Africa, which changed my life and who I thought I was yet again. And it all worked out. Now, I could speak for another hour about Jim and I and our journey, but I'm going to sum it up with this. I moved down to North Carolina in October. We got engaged in December. Jim was accepted into the Catholic Church in April, and then we got married in December. And I talked to Jim as I was preparing this talk, and I said, did I ever put pressure on you to be Catholic? And he looked at me and he said, no, never once did you say anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. Because I remember wanting him to choose that, not as a requirement for being with me, but as something he felt called to do. So you remember that saying that I said at the beginning, where you need to find out what the most important thing in your life is and build your life around that? Well, I figured out what it was. It was God. And so since then, that has been my greatest endeavor, to build my life around God. So for me, that means a few things. Number one is prayer. God really changed my prayer life from a check in the box to a true conversation with Christ. And he did it very slowly and over a great deal of time. But I cannot emphasize how much that simple act of prayer has also changed my life. So every morning when I get up, the first thing I do is read scripture. I have this cool little app called Laudate, and it actually sends the mass readings for the day to me, so it's very easy. And that has made a huge difference in my life. The other thing that I did was take a charism test. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that, but it helps you discern what are your gifts to give back to the community of Christ. And so I highly encourage you to go on a retreat or find someone who's trained in it to help you discern what your wonderful gifts are to give them back to the community. The other thing I did was read a ton of books. Not just any books, but spiritual books. Because I thought, if I'm going to make God the most important thing in my life, I need to get to know him better. I need to get to know my faith better. I don't want to check the box anymore. And I have a long list of books, so if anybody is interested in picking my brain, feel free. And the last thing that God has shown me, which is so important in my life, is community. About a month ago, I was talking with a couple of friends, and I remember telling them, I'm equally terrified that no one will come tonight, or that people will actually come. And they said to me, yeah, but isn't that the point, that we're all here together and that we're all here to help each other? And I was like, yeah, it really is. So there's another thought that I want to leave you with. One of my favorite little sayings that I came across one day goes like this. Life is not meant to be a journey to the grave with the intention of ending up in a well-preserved body. Instead, it should be meant to be skidded into with chocolate in one hand, wine in the other, saying, woo-hoo, what a ride, right? And to me, this means living your life to its absolute fullest. But I'm going to tweak the saying just a little bit, because this is my prayer for all of us. That we live a life so full of love And we use our bodies to our fullest to do the will of God. And in one hand, we hang on to Jesus. And the other hand, we grab onto our neighbor so that we can all skid into heaven saying, woohoo, what a ride. Thank you.